guys? Coach Justin with RYU BJJ, and I'm super excited about today's episode. I'm here today with the great and talented Casey and Lindsay Stentz at Renzo Gracie's Sammamish. It's a beautiful facility. You guys also have Renzo Gracie Snoqualmie, a separate gym too. If you're in the area, I would highly suggest coming out to get some good rolls in and some good training. Really excited for what you guys have to show, so thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And yeah, my pleasure. Do you each individually want to take a second just to talk about what brought you to Jiu-Jitsu and kind of, what took you then from starting training to here now owning multiple schools? And
for sure. You want to start?
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to do that in summary as best possible. The year was 2006. Personally, if you know me, you probably know a bit about my journey, but I was a very unhealthy person. I smoked cigarettes, about 2 packs a day. I was a very heavy drinker. I had a really unhealthy relationship with alcohol. I could drink a 5th of vodka in a night, you understand? Like, I was really, really unhealthy, and I needed a workout. I started at Ivan Salivari's. I just went to go try a class, and I met this guy the first night. Like, that was a terrifying. He was dressed when I went in. Like, I went in early. I'm like a serial early person. Anyway, I went in and he was dressed. And then I sat down, started talking to him about doing class, blah, blah, blah. He's like, yeah, go in the locker room, change, class will get started in a minute. Then I went in, I changed, and I'm out there stretching, doing my thing. Ivan goes in the locker room, dressed. And then he comes out in just the Valley Tudo shorts. And I'm, oh my God. And he comes out and starts stretching and like slapping himself. And I'm like, oh, what I get myself into. Like, I should have booked it out of there.
you stayed?
Yeah, but I stayed, yeah. And really, I kickboxed for like my first year and a half. It was my big focus. Ivan was still in the UFC. I'm dating myself here, but the IFL was still a thing, if you remember that, and the Seattle Tiger Sharks trained there. So really a really strong group, not only grapplers, but the striking was kind of what, in my head, I thought what I wanted my martial arts focus to be. I had wrestled a little bit when I was a kid. And the singlet was not my thing, whatever. But I love them now. I just want to throw them. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, so I kickboxed. I started doing pancration class. That's what it was at Ivan's, which was submission wrestling class. And Cindy Hales, it's Professor Cindy at the time, came down and taught no-gi at the school. Through a series of circumstances now, about the 2-year mark of me training, 2008 we'll call it, moved to California, and I tried, which we'll call like the sister gym of Ivan's, which would be Tito Ortiz's gym down there, Huntington Beach Ultimate Training Center, I think is what it was called at the time, and it was totally not for me, like meathead, like it was really, and maybe it's different today, no shade on the place, just not my vibe. And the only other name I knew was Gracie Baja because of Cindy. So I found Gracie Baja Costa Mesa. At the time, there was Gracie Baja Costa Mesa as well as Lake Forest, where Master Carlos Gracie was teaching. And I bounced back and forth through those couple places. Trained there up until like my late blue belt, and then met Lindsay, and we moved back here to Washington and started training under Professor Carlos Seaver. Really, like, I fell in love with Jiu-Jitsu for a multitude of reasons, most of which had to do with what I saw it do for people, what it personally did for me. If I rewind back to like my unhealthy habits or we'll call them relationships I had or patterns that I had that were detrimental to life and just like being a vital, functioning human being, Jiu-Jitsu made them all fall away, yeah. I heard horror stories from people who had like stopped smoking. Oh, it was the hardest thing to stop smoking cigarettes in my life. Not me. I just wanted to train. I just wanted to train more, and it stopped me from breathing. So ultimately, I quit. And Jiu-Jitsu kind of did that for a lot of things in my life. So it was hard to stop feeling better and better and better through Jiu-Jitsu and hold on to those things that just were tearing me down. Opening a school, when we had our son, I wanted to raise my son on the mats. I wanted to play. I've known a lot of kids that grew up in jiu-jitsu who focused on jiu-jitsu, who like maybe they didn't have parents that were gym owners, but who lived on the mats. Kyron Gracie, I remember he was training at GB Costa Mesa, and we were hanging out on the mats, and I asked him, I was like, Kyron, I was like, he was a purple belt at the time. I was white belt. I was like, when was the first time you ever put on a gi? And he's like, man, always. And at that time, I was like, I'm going to do that for my son. I was like, if I ever have a son or a daughter, at the time I had no idea that Hendo would be a boy, but I said, I'm going to do that for my son. If I have a son, he's going to grow up, or a child, they're going to grow up on the mats. So when we had a son, it was like what the next thing that we were going to do was create this space where he could never have the patterns that I got myself into yet, never have an option. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's how I got there. Was that a summary?
That was perfect, man. Beautiful. I love it. That's the journey. That's I have so many questions to drill down.
Yeah, we keep going.
Lindsay, how about you? What was the draw, and what made you stay, and kind of your story?
I mean, I guess it was never something that I thought I'd be doing, but in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense given my history and my past. But it was something that I started because of Casey. Never was in my mirror of things that I wanted to do or was amped up to do, but I always really liked hard workouts, boot camps, Bikram yoga, stuff where I felt like I was going to die, and this fits the bill. To be smothered and all this kind of stuff by a bunch of big men, it was humbling, and it also helped me with a lot of my traumas. So we met, he tried to get me to train for quite some time, and I was just really, heels digging into the ground. We're not doing this, I'm cool, like, you go do your thing, I'm happy doing my thing. And it took, I think it was Kids Pan Ams, he was, ring coordinating, right? And I decided to go along for the company, right? We were newly dating, and I figured I wanted to hang out with him and he'd be gone otherwise. So I jumped on board, and again, watching like those little 4-year-olds come out and kind of waddle out onto the mat and, unsure of themselves, trying to like, what are we doing here? And, looking like little teddy bears wrestling each other. And it was like, okay, if these 4-year-olds can get out there and compete in a pretty, massive, what seemed like tournament, like I think I can go and try class. And it took a while, like the first 6 months to a year, I primarily trained because of him and for him. And then it took probably 6 months to a year for me to start doing it for myself and to feel the benefits. Because it was like a lot of traumas. A lot of the time I held myself back, and I'd walk off the mats or get to the car, and it was just crying. And it was a lot of working through my own complexities and stuff. But I started in California at GB Costa Mesa. Great group over there. And then when we came up here, literally within 24 hours of driving up here, we were at Carlos's gym and trying to figure out, where do we train, what do we do, how do we do this, and integrated into the community up here. And having a kid, moving, finally buying a house and kind of situating into a little area, we decided to open our own gym, which has been a roller coaster, but a lot of fun. And now we've got this one too, which is again a roller coaster and stressful, but a lot of fun, right? Like it's you can see what it's doing for people, and I think that's the biggest thing. I like teaching, I like helping people, I like supporting, men and women alike and kids and all this kind of stuff. And I think with a lot of my history or my like trauma history and stuff like that as a kid, it feels very empowering to help people who don't think that they're as powerful as they are realize that, and especially kids to realize whether it's a bully situation or a protection situation that they're stronger than they realize that they are, and it's very powerful for me.
There is definitely, that as a fellow school owner, I think that is one of the most rewarding elements is finding those individuals who don't see that in themselves, that they could be strong or they could protect themselves, so that's the thing, and awakening that. Like, that is a really, really cool thing. It's equally rewarding to take a very athletic kid who's just a killer on the mat and watch them do all the tournaments too. It's all good, but in particular, that is pretty awesome. Well, so you guys had pretty disparate starts then to your jiu-jitsu. It sounds like Casey, if I'm right, you had more of that MMA striking no-gi bent for the first maybe several years of training.
Yeah.
And then you started training in the gi initially?
Yeah, primarily gi, and it was probably only until we moved up here that I ever really dabbled in no-gi. And even still, the gyms that we were at had, minimal no-gi classes. I mean, I still favor the gi. I love a good lapel. And, it's definitely my fave, but we try to have a lot of no-gi at our gyms to kind of vary the playing field a little bit, because no-gi is a lot of fun too.
Do you guys do any MMA stuff? Like your training items?
No, I loved kickboxing. Ultimately, like the sustainability of jiu-jitsu became much more attractive to me.
Less had drama.
Especially years add-on.
I remember my shins just like for days just on fire from checking kicks, and the person who did it, I never liked them. You can armbar me 100 times, you understand? I don't dislike, but that guy who divoted my shin, I still want to catch. No.
You're still ill will. No, totally.
The guts run deep.
Yeah. Well, so so you do plenty of no-gi with students that are in your schools. If somebody doesn't want to do no-gi, they just have no interest, they're like, I like the tradition of wearing the gi, I like the rank structure and the belts and whatnot. Do you still try to say, well, but maybe try no-gi or vice versa, or is it, to each their own?
I definitely push people toward learning in a gi. I think jiu-jitsu at its core and at its root is about self-defense. I've seen a few fights in my life. I've only seen one, no, I never saw one, where somebody stripped down and got down to a rash guard and went out and got in a fight. So the realism of having clothes on is applicable, right?
Sure.
And that's what I try to teach the students, right? If you want to learn how to defend yourself, you need to think about a real life situation. And the gi and clothes, especially here in the Northwest, right? Maybe in Southern California, you could argue that no gi may be more common to bump into somebody, but here for sure, if you're defending yourself, you're dressed and hoodies, jackets, and things like that, right? So I don't push anybody. I do push people in the direction of self-defense, because in my opinion, if they're not understanding jiu-jitsu to defend themselves, they're not building the foundation, and the foundation is critical.
No, I would tend to agree with that too. I think that's one of I talked with a number of people on the channel about the kind of worry of if we become too sport oriented, we lose that self-defense focus. And deep half guard is super awesome, but I don't know if it's the first thing that I would do in a street self-defense altercation. Like probably not.
Yeah.
And so I think it's good to acknowledge those roots. Just personally, I think that is something that we should keep in jiu-jitsu. Do you guys have any self-defense specific classes? Yeah.
Well, yes. Number one, we always have an element of self-defense to what we're teaching, and that will evolve during the week, or we do kind of bi-week or two week segments of what we study. That will move into, as we move into more advanced techniques and sequences. We're not just teaching letters or vowels or consonants, we're teaching words and sentences and paragraphs. Then it gets more into like moving here, so more in the sport, if I had to say one direction or the other. But absolutely, we always have a focus of self-defense. We want to be well-rounded, right? I think that's important now with Jiu-Jitsu, right? Jiu-Jitsu is getting very big. The sport of Jiu-Jitsu, not only just for self-defense, but the sport of Jiu-Jitsu is becoming much more palatable to the average consumer, which it's a double-edged sword, right? It presents a huge opportunity for all of us. It gets eyes on this thing that we've all been in love with for a lot of time, you understand? But at the same time, there is that danger of diluting that what brought Renzo Gracie in and made it smash. You understand? Everybody that he bumped into, didn't matter about size or any of that. Like, at my core, I know we need to keep our knuckles tight around that. And even though we can play with the sport things and all that, can be a definitely fun, well-rounded school and teacher in that way. But at the base, if my student goes out in the street and they jump guard on somebody, you understand? Like, I've done the biggest disservice, and I'm going to shut the doors and I'm done. You understand? Yeah.
So no pulling guard.
Yes, you jump guard on the street, it's a big problem. I'm just gonna, anybody who's out there listening, don't jump guard on the street. Okay, there we go. That being said.
how about takedown classes and that sort of thing? That's another thing I've talked to multiple school owners about. I think those are notoriously poorly attended classes because, like taking repetitive falls. I come from a judo background.
Yeah, sure.
It's hard on the body, but I think, like you already alluded to, it's a necessary skill to have we all start standing up, typically, in any altercation or match.
100%. We always have a focus on an aspect of the stand-up. Again, we look at, I wouldn't call it a curriculum, but we're constantly like evolving progressing what we're teaching, and it has to do with what we taught in our last segment, and it will tie into what we're going to teach in our next segment, if that makes sense. Curriculum, for lack of a better way to explain it, it's not a curriculum, it's what we're, it's a real live thing. Instead of like me looking into May and figuring out what I'm going to teach, we're in June and July, you understand, we're marching, we're planning to do every step of that is going to bring into May, if that makes any sense at all, right? This week, right, if we're teaching De La Hiva and the questions and the feedback and the interaction of the students get us into working on a little bit of single leg X, maybe we play with that towards the end of the week, and that will be part of what goes into the following week, if that makes sense at all. So it's more of like a living curriculum that we're working on constantly. We also have, the school up here. And there's so I'm balancing back and forth between both schools. In a nutshell, we're trying to incorporate, always have a structure and a progress to what we're teaching, and that it's logical. Next week makes sense to this week. Some of it becomes ad hoc in a way, right? Some questions and feedback and interaction with the students demand maybe a little bit of a pivot, and we don't want to be so hard-lined that we're teaching a double leg takedown this week and then a sprawl at 6:15, and that doesn't create the environment where I think people learn the best.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, and then further from that, how do the two of you, because I run a school, but it's just me, so like I just decide what we're going to do, but with the two of you, how do you coordinate or bring your ideas jointly to the table and say, plan out that same curriculum?
A lot of time we're kind of missing each other and like hitting, like crossing paths, so to speak, and like, would you teach today at lunchtime? Would you teach, you know what I mean, kind of thing, and just kind of going over those kinds of different scenarios. What did you teach? How did it work? All this kind of stuff, so we can kind of, grow off of that and kind of spin off of that.
We have a very, very tight community at our gyms. I think one of the standout, I think if you spoke to any of our students, especially at Snoqualmie, one of the standouts for them would be the culture. So example, when we're talking, like when she tells me about like who was in class, you understand, like I know that gives me optics into what I can do in my next class, right? I would say one of the biggest parts of jiu-jitsu for me is the community it's brought around me. I had a fucked up childhood, I can swear, right?
Yeah.
I got a fucked up childhood, and we don't have to do any kind of deep dive into that, but like the family I've created has oftentimes been much closer than my blood relatives. So Jiu-Jitsu and the people that I found on the mats, like we keep all those people very, very close to us. They're our family, not not necessarily like a student or a customer. Yeah.
You're close. It's very tight knit.
Totally. It's one of the biggest driving factors in like the switch that we made. Yeah.
What do you? I've heard that sentiment from multiple people, and I've experienced that too. That like relationships build really fast, trust builds really fast, and I've had a number of people sort of posit things, and I'd be curious if you guys have a take on that, like why that is in jiu-jitsu. The one biggest sort of repetitive theme that I've heard is people are like, well, if somebody has you in a position to do harm to you, and they don't, so if they have you in a choke, you tap, and they respect that, all of a sudden well, at least to some level, you're a trustworthy person.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that is one factor, but what do you guys think? What about jiu-jitsu sort of uniquely, I think amongst activities, hobbies, arts, what have you, why is there that tendency for things to be so tight-knit, for relationships to develop so fast? And we have such a good community.
Yeah.
I'm always searching for the rationale for that.
I mean, I'm not military, I don't have a military background, but from what I know of the military and the tight bonds they form within those different structures, it feels, or what I would anticipate to feel, very similarly like, right? We're forging battles together, we're out, you know, getting wrecked together, we're out in the same scenario, you know, you can hurt me, but you're choosing not to, and you're choosing to keep my well-being just like I'm gonna do the same for you, kind of thing. So I think it just really forges deep relationships quickly. And then something that I always think about, but I don't think it gets talked about a lot, is in a day and age where we're so technology, you know, driven, TV, you know, all these different devices that are grabbing our attentions, there's a lack of human contact, and we're putting ourselves in classes where it is all human contact, and whether we're using that as, you know, like a sensory thing or deep compression, right? We talk about kids with different needs and things and calming nervous systems, and we talk about big deep hugs because it starts to regulate our nervous system, and the fact that we're doing this all together, I think it has a lot of different facets coming at it, but I think the fact that we're forging tough battles together, that we're improving as individuals but also as a team, because we all know we can't do jiu-jitsu just by ourselves, right? So we need those teammates to be there, to want to train with us, to enjoy training with us, to be pushed by each other so we can grow and continue to develop as individuals, but also, you know, the other little aspects of, you know, we're hugging for an hour, and you know what I mean, and that's gotta have a draw to it too. Some scientific thing that I'm not too privy on, right? But I know has to be there.
It's science, though.
It's science.
In a world where we don't, I think humans need connection, and we are trading our connection with human beings for connection through a device, and through a medium, and the human, bereft of that needed interaction, when it finds it, will just that you flourish. Like I think it's something. If you see people that are open-minded enough when they come try that it happens to them, you can almost pinpoint the moment when it snapped and they're like, wow, I can be vulnerable here. I think that's another big one that people don't think about, right? Like you alluded to it, right? Like I can lay there and you could break my arm. You choking me, I'm almost unconscious, and I trust you enough to take me up to that very, 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 very fine point where I say stop, and I trust that you're going to do that. Where you could hold on, and maybe that wouldn't, you know, the outcome wouldn't be as positive for me. So I think in a world where we have all these shields up around us all the time, and this is the closest thing that we come to human interaction and connection. Jiu-Jitsu offers us really what we need as human beings, like at our core, at our root. Yeah,
no, that's beautiful answers by both of you. I would agree with that. Well, then further from that, gym culture, because you mentioned that, and I think you guys, like, it's no secret, you guys are known for having really good gym culture, and that doesn't happen by accident, I don't think, or at least I don't suppose it does. But what are the factors, or what do you guys do to help ensure that? Like, how do you foster that?
We want people that are, I'll try to answer this. Like, I think you could high level put everybody in jiu-jitsu, or maybe in life, into two buckets, especially on the mats. Like, people are here to build an ego, or people are here to shed an ego. Yeah, I want the latter of those two buckets. Yeah, and I look for that, and I'm open about that with my students, and I will remove people. Example: I had a visitor at a recent open mat that was from another school, came in, has come to my school, a couple open mats, like really rude, man, treated coming to our open mat like a competition, yeah? And I got that, I not only watched it and saw it, but I got that feedback from people who don't give me feedback about people, like in a negative way, you know, like, so he showed up at this last one, and I was like, all right, man, you want to train? But before he walked in the door, I said, before you do, we got to have a talk. And he's like, well, what's up? So then we're talking there. And I explained myself to him, and ultimately he chose not to stay on the mat. And that's fine, totally cool. But afterwards, one of the brand new white belt females, very small in stature person, who actually works in, a rehabilitation center for kids that are mentally troubled, so could actually use this functionally in her day-to-day life. She came up to me and she was like, "Hey, professor," she was like, "well, that was super uncomfortable to watch me kicking this, asking this guy to not, either act right or not be on the mat." She was like, "It makes me super comfortable to be here." And that was enough, because she's the person that I want there, not him.
Sure.
Yeah.
Especially because she's going to ultimately keep everybody safer too, right? Like, it's a feeling, right? Like, we want to train with people who also want to be there, who also have good nature, goodwill, who, want to have tough roles and better themselves, but not at the fault of injuring other people. Because again, you break your toys, you can no longer play with them, and so we need to have those training partners. And it's something that makes me really proud, though. Like, we have gotten that feedback. I was at Open Mat in Snoqualmie today, and after Open Mat, me and some of the guys were talking, and that was exactly the feedback we got. He goes, "I've trained a bunch of places, in the Pacific Northwest, and I've trained back at home in Illinois and down in Florida where I spent some time." And he goes, "And this is by far the best culture that I've ever been to." And it's not to brag, but it makes me feel at home. Like, I've got really bad anxiety, so having a gym that's welcoming and that's not the typical, like, I was afraid to go into, his gym, and it wasn't a scary place to go, but before going in there, that's what it felt. It felt scary, it felt intimidating, and we get that feedback from a lot of people, like, "Oh, I want to be in shape first," or "I'm just a little too afraid," and it's more accessible than a lot of people think, because I think that there's that negative connotation that a lot of places, it's like, "Oh, you're going to go in and be beaten up and get thrown around," and while that is kind of the case, you know what I mean, it can happen in a friendly manner, and it can happen in a safe place where, you don't have to be out of commission or not going to work because your shoulder's messed up, or, your knee, now you need surgery, or all this kind of stuff. Plus, I think that there's a beautiful aspect into the control, right? Like, there's a good saying, and I can't remember it for the life of me, but it's something to the extent of, if you're dangerous, right, but you can control yourself, then that's where the power is, right? Like, it's one thing to be dangerous and just go crazy and have an ego, but if you can be dangerous and whatever, but be calm and be, it's more beautiful. You don't have to be loud and boisterous and crazy and whatever, egotistical. You can be calm and still dangerous and still have fun.
There's still strength there.
Yeah.
No, I would absolutely agree with that. And I would echo something. The willingness to have those uncomfortable conversations seems to be pretty important.
Yeah.
And they're not, they could definitely be, somebody's going too hard, but they could also be somebody's hygiene isn't the best,
Sure.
or, they're, for a variety of reasons, a whole myriad of reasons, be willing to engage with people. And then hopefully, they learn from that. They don't just take it as an insult and walk out the door, but they actually, find the feedback as something like, I could change for the better and make this work. Well, okay, and then you mentioned something as far as like people going hard and tough roles and that sort of thing. Yeah, there is that element of jiu-jitsu. I think we all want it to be honest with us.
Yeah.
We don't just want it to be so soft-handed that it's unusable, but we also don't want to go so hard that we're breaking each other's limbs regularly, because you can only do that once and people don't come back. What are striking that balance is kind of a further extension of that first question, but how do you ensure that the roles are still honest, that people are still rolling to a level where it's functional?
I think it takes constant communication with the group, right? It's something that, example, when we start our, try to call it like resistance training. I think part of it, if you call it, we're going to go fight right now, like that sounds different than
Sure.
We're going to go practice the move we did now, but with resistance, right? I have kind of a little speech that I give 90% of the time where it's like, hey, let's all stop for a second and know that we're going to do this, and everybody's getting hyped up, and you're putting your mouth guard in, and like you tuck the knife in your belt, and like, remember, we're all friends, we're just, right, no one's taking home a medal, we need to take care of each other. Like, without each other, we're not going to be able to train. So I think a constant reminder with the students helps them start to remind each other, right? It becomes ingrained at a point, It's hard.
Process.
Yeah, it's a learning process. It's harder here than it is to get, like, we're really strict on hygiene. Example, like you wear shoes everywhere at our schools except for on the mats. I've been to many schools where you walk out the front door with no back on the mats, like in the bathroom with no shoes. Back on the mats. You understand? Like, so there's levels to this, right? And if, to your point, I can echo, if you're not willing to have those uncomfortable conversations with people, then those things will get out of control, be it culture, hygiene, any of those things. You just really get canned funny responses, yeah? You know what I mean? Those things go a long way, right? So constantly reminding and just keeping that communication line open with the students.
Yeah.
Cool. And then you've run schools now, the one school you have had for, is it 9 years, did you say? Or
6.
Yeah,
Okay.
6.
Yeah.
And then this branch has been open
Just in September.
just since September.
Yeah,
Well,
so a few months,
congratulations on
yeah.
that.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
September 30th.
To be exact, for the record. When you were part of an organization as far as your affiliation for a long, long time throughout the bulk of your career, and then switched more recently about a year ago to Renzo
2
Gracie.
years, yeah.
2 years. And that's, first of all, huge fan of Renzo Gracie. That's he's one of my favorite people to watch in MMA, one of the pioneers of the sport, legend. So how cool is that? Just my fanboy question. And then how important is it to be a representative of his, and what does that look like? Just tell me a bit about that relationship.
It's a great question. We had the good fortune, Lindsay and I got really close with Renzo Gracie Jr., who's Renzo's cousin, and the grandson of George Gracie, who was Carlos and Elio's brother. Anyway, we got very close with him, and through that relationship met Renzo, and what was that like? Like, I fanboy still about, like, he FaceTimed me one day when I was at the office, man, and like, to answer that phone call was like, it really was mind-boggling. But when you meet him, he's not like that. You understand? Like, he's the complete opposite. So he's the nicest, kindest, most humble human being that anyone will ever have the chance to bump into. And getting close with Rodrigo and Renzo, really, Lindsay and my vision for Jiu-Jitsu has been about building a culture, a family, a gym, a place in our community for people to come and try to become a little bit better every day, right? We don't care about making the next UFC champion. If they walk in there, man, I'm going to train them as best, but that's not what my dream is. My dream is my kid growing up there and like having all of his friends there and kind of saying, and us having a place to go where we feel at home to go do our jiu-jitsu and do what we love and share it with people, yeah? And our vision really aligned with his vision of jiu-jitsu, and the more we communicated, the more we talked, Rodrigo, Renzo, that part of the family, like, we really felt connected to that vision and maybe an older way of looking at this community that you create through the sharing of jiu-jitsu, yeah? Where I've seen other approaches to that community building that are frankly like feels more like a commoditization of the community rather than an embracing of the community and allowing people to be part of it, not supplying it. Yeah, of course there's like people that you understand, but people that were running business, of course, and your students understand that too. But like,
it changes when people don't feel like a dollar. You know what I mean? Like a monetary relationship. If you can change that and change it into more of a personal relationship.
Sure.
You know, and jiu-jitsu gyms are business. I get that. People need to cover their costs and make a living and all this kind of stuff. But we're not trying to nickel and dime. You know what I mean? Like if money is what's holding you back from training, come train with us. We'll figure it out. You know what I mean? If you can't afford to get a gi, come train with us. We'll get you one. You know what I mean? Versus feeling like we have to push that stuff on people and have them, you know, or that being a boundary that they can't train because, you know, monetarily it's a boundary or whatever. Or you've got a family of 6 and like, well, we can only afford for one to come train. Like,
by people who aren't getting any jiu-jitsu training.
Right?
Those barriers exist. And the jiu-jitsu should really be the thing. I agree with both of you. That should be the thing that we're selling, if anything, rather than the fabric that we're wearing or that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. I don't care. I do. My first professor was like white gis only, like blue gis okay a little bit. So like black gis, I remember he'd be like, if somebody came in in black, he'd be like, "Are you a badass?" His name was Professor Vander. He's a big guy. He'd be like, "Are you a badass in your black gi?" So but now I wear them and I love them. Don't get me wrong. But like the tie-dye gi, that would make me vomit. Other than that being said, though, I don't care what gi you are. I care that you want to show up every day and you want to learn jiu-jitsu and you want to be a good partner, and the goal is that you're incrementally making yourself a little bit better every day. If that's your goal, I'm going to be right there with you in the trenches, digging shovels and whatever we have to do to help you get to that place. Yeah.
So you've both been training for quite a while, since 2006 and 2010. So that's long enough to have seen quite a few changes in jiu-jitsu. I guess, what are some notable things that you've seen from a personal standpoint? And this could be, involvement of certain demographics. It could be techniques that are more popular, gi versus no gi, and that whole debate. What are the things that you guys have seen that you think are important, or that, for better or for worse, see
women
different?
training?
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
I remember being one of the only women in class, or one of two women in class, or, and now with so many different organizations, Girls in Gis and all those big things that are drawing huge crowds, is so amazing. I think not only is jiu-jitsu great for everybody, but, as little boys, I'm sure you didn't have a lack of hearing how brave and how strong and how tough you are. And as little girls, we don't hear that often. We come into these spaces, and most often it's, we're ready to learn because I don't know how to be tough. I don't know how to be strong. Teach me what to do. Where it feels like a lot of guys, we break down those egos only to rebuild them, or to build them back up. But a lot of women come into the gym really, feeling powerless and being amazed by how beautiful and strong that they can be. Like how beautiful jiu-jitsu is, how strong they can be, and to know that they are powerful than they once thought that they were. But women in the gym.
That is a huge change. I started training in '97, and I will say, one of the first formal gyms I went to, Cindy Hales, actually introduced me to the triangle choke. Completely just put me out, and I was like, well, this really works. This is super awesome, and she's such a cool person. But the explosion of participation of women in jiu-jitsu is one of the really cool things over the last couple of decades.
Yeah.
Cindy Hales is an interesting pebble you would drop into it in the wakes that she's created. Similar to my experience, I remember getting rolled up by this 100-pound, and I had to echo kind of her. I thought I was a tough guy. I didn't fight a lot, and she rolled me up, and I was like, holy crap. I have to know how she did that magic, I wonder how many places she did that. And
right.
But it's the beauty from the other end, because there's times where we get people who are a little big for their britches, I don't know if I was in the military, I don't know if you're going to teach me much. Come and try class, we'll see, maybe some stuff, meshes, maybe some stuff is new, maybe we'll teach you something. And then he'll throw me with them, and I have to do what I do, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my goodness, what just happened? And it's it's impressive. But on the reverse end, from my end, it's oh, good job, you could do it, Yeah. So it's
validating. How about for you? Any particular change that you've seen?
Too many. How many? What? I don't know. What would be the biggest standout for me? This change in jiu-jitsu growth, the explosion of jiu-jitsu, and I would say, on that note, I think we're seeing really the second explosion. I would call the first explosion onto the scene when Hoist came into the UFC, right, and all of that, all of Machados and all of that, moving into the U.S., we're seeing a big explosion. And I think, it has to do with no-gi events like ADCC, like Fight to Win. I don't think people give Mr. Daniels the credit he deserves. Love the guy. Shout out to Seth if he sees this. Anyway, those kind of promotions that get more eyes on Jiu-Jitsu, I think, have been huge for us. So no-gi and those kind of events for people to go and watch that are more easy for your average person to watch, right? More palatable. If I don't understand an omoplata, what am I looking at? If you don't, right? So that for your average person, Jiu-Jitsu is not a watchable sport. And I think things like Fight to Win, ADCC, things that have more action and more, even Craig Jones like this, gets it in front of people. And that's been the biggest thing for me. Watching gyms, when we moved up here, there was maybe 6 or 7 schools in the Seattle area, we'll call it, right? Now there's 60. And to me, that's not like discouraging as a gym owner. It's encouraging. I think all of the different affiliations and teams and all that only, it rises, it makes us all rise, right? I think it's great for everybody. I love my competition, right? I think about it similar to when I go compete, right? Like, you make me better, right? The other jiu-jitsu schools do the same, right? And the more eyes on jiu-jitsu, the more people doing it, the fuller the mats will be, right?
Totally agree.
The occupancy will be up on the mats and in every class for really every school.
Sure. No, I agree with that. Well, that was one of the bigger reasons for me to start this project, going around talking to people in the Pacific Northwest that are teaching. Growing up, I grew up kind of like in the punk rock music scene, I played in bands, and there was the scene, there were the bands and the people that played in the bands, but then there was all this, additional sort of like the people who were taking photographs of the bands, people who were publishing little zines on Xerox and like handing them out, making this whole like you said, together they rose, right? It made a scene that people could then sort of digest, and that's kind of the hope, or that's the fun part.
I love that
for me. But no, I totally agree with that. Well, who would want to train Jiu-Jitsu if there was just one school and that was it? Like, we need competitors, we need other people to do our Jiu-Jitsu against.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need multiple different flavors. My gym's culture isn't for everybody too. Like, there's people that want to be they want to walk into a gym where they're gonna get killed every day and like
or that they prefer the way somebody teaches, or whatever, right? Like the way that I teach might not be digestible for everybody, or I might be too long-winded, or I might not give detail a certain way that somebody prefers, or digest properly. So having those options, right?
Yeah.
I don't want Mexican food every night.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I mean, maybe I could do that.
I was going to say, we have to pick a genre, and like we're committing. I think.
Point taken.
Point taken. I think honestly, the individual aspect of my jiu-jitsu, right? Like, because I think everybody who does jiu-jitsu can say that a little bit, right? I know I tell the students at our school all the time, I'll show you a technique, and then in 2 years it's yours. You're just going to do your thing with it. So by virtue of kind of that sentiment, there should be numerous schools, right? If you're good at sharing this thing and you're good at describing, like, you should do it then, right? Like, and there should be more mat space. Right, it makes me happy to see more schools opening up, more people doing jiu-jitsu, more people showing up to the Rev, more people talking about it, more people understanding what an omoplata is when they see it, right? It's a beautiful technique. Well, actually, I hate it.
It's not in my repertoire, it's not my jiu-jitsu.
But I do appreciate it. Yeah.
Sure, no, 100%. Well, it is gratifying. I agree with you kind of in the public sphere, because we've all been practicing long enough that there was a time where you tried to tell people about jiu-jitsu and there's like just a blank face. They're like, I don't really, you like karate? Like, with the karate chop?
I still get that so often.
Right? Or I'll tell this story. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm going to tell this story. When I first started training, I was super excited about it. I would tell my parents, oh, this is so cool. And my parents were trying to be encouraging and supportive, and so I was still a teenager when I started training. And so I got home from school, and my mom had gone out and bought a bunch of WWF magazines and like left them in my room. Like, yes, for that thing that you're doing, that Jiu-Jitsu. I'm like, thank you, Mom. It wasn't quite the same thing. Jiu-Jitsu's different. It's different.
It was a thought that came.
Yeah. Still love you. Anyway, yeah.
Maybe a little closer than the
karate challenge.
Let's give her that credit.
Right. So you're really supportive. I'm not trying to embarrass you. Anyway. But yeah, so I guess with the mind to then, different people's stylistic teaching methods and that sort of thing, how do you guys feel about cross-training, like for your students?
We love it.
Huge supporter.
Yeah,
absolutely encouraged. Man, I don't know everything. Like I learned that a long time ago. I don't know everything. And I want people to go develop their own flavor to everything, and I believe that I believe in that cross-pollination, and it doesn't make me nervous, it makes me more excited for myself too. Like I have some, like all my students are talented. I have students that go out and learn things and come back and they show me little things that I pick up and like, that's amazing, right? That's part of the beauty of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think that was something we always really liked, because ever since we moved up to the Pacific Northwest, we were always kind of jumping around for different reasons, not necessarily like, we still had our home academy and everything like that, but it was like we'd go up here and then we'd go down there and we had friends over here, and it was, again, still just a big community for us. So we just kind of did it naturally. It was like, oh, well, we'll come visit you tomorrow, and then, now that we have gyms, it's much harder to get physically everywhere with the duties that we have and the stuff that we have to handle, but it was just kind of part of who we were initially. Like, oh, well, we all meet here, let's train together, but now you're over there, so let's go train with you over there. Now you're over there, so let's go train with you over there. And,
Well, that's kind of one of the reasons that when you show up at the Rev, then it kind of feels like a family reunion.
Totally.
That bigger community is there. Well, okay, so I like to ask this question to everybody who comes onto the channel. And I'm sure you run into this a lot as gym owners, but for people who are just starting jiu-jitsu or just like right at the precipice of starting, they're really interested, but they haven't taken the plunge yet. That's kind of a vulnerable space to be, and there's a high attrition rate. It can be hard physically or emotionally or intellectually to start the whole process. What advice do you give to people who are just starting out to help facilitate the best possible jiu-jitsu journey?
I suggest, if it's possible in your area, but just like if there's many gyms to try a few. And that's not to say that if you walk into a place and you fall in love, then I'm not saying don't choose to go back there, but if you walk in some place and it turns you off and like you're like, that was not for me, go try another one, Jiu-Jitsu is more than just about like it's the arm bar or the wrist lock, which I really prefer, but it's about individual growth. So don't let the first place you go, if it turns you off, stop you from completing that growth that you picture yourself, your vision for yourself, because it's absolutely attainable with Jiu-Jitsu. So go find it wherever you can.
I think it's not an easy answer, but just going in and trying, right? Find a place that feels comfortable, that feels safe, and that meets your criteria, whether it's closeness or, whatever you need. And just go try it, because we were all there once, right? Sounds cliche to say, but it's like, we're all 5 once. We had to learn, we were all there once. We were all new people. We all felt like the inconvenience to the older belt or the higher belt who, oh man, I'm so embarrassed, whatever, that the brown belt gets paired with little old me and now they don't get to do anything. And then realizing in hindsight that we helped the brown belt in those different ways, like just like they were helping us describe the technique and learn the technique, we're also aiding them. The more that they can teach us, the more that they can describe stuff and help us, the more that they're inherently learning, right? The little key things that they're picking up on and that they're digesting and having to stop and think about, especially, as we get higher up and we start to do things more naturally and we start to forget those little nuanced moves that we do, did you just move your foot there? I don't know, did I? Yeah, I did, But I feel like go in, try it, because you never know what you're missing out on, but at the same time, like, we were all there, and I think most gyms take care of those newer people in that sense, because we all feel that same, nervousness when we walked in and whatnot.
I always tell people, like, your first class is the hardest class, You don't know what you're walking into. In fact, like, you know, you could be walking in a Cobra Kai, you don't know if you're walking in, it's going to be a dude in a valley too. No, but like it's probably much better than you're expecting. Yeah, so I like to really give at the end of a class when we have intros, and this happens often. My longtime students will tell you that probably verbatim out of what I say, but like I give them a hand. Like today was your first class. It's probably the hardest one you're ever going to do. You didn't know what you were going to walk into, right? You didn't know if I was going to be a nice person, or my training partner was going to be a kind person or want to hurt me, and you got over that part. So if you can get over that part, I would say a high percentage of the time you'll find that jiu-jitsu school that fits your vision for what you want yourself to be.
And like a lot of things on that other side of discomfort or unknown, right? Like most academies that I've walked into, whether I've been friends with the people who've trained there or been more of a newbie, like you guys know all too well, like we're usually met with open arms, right? Like we're excited to have a new person joining us, to train with us, to build the academy, wherever that is. And it's exciting. And, you know, there's never a lack of, you know, seeing a new person and almost everybody getting up, hey, how's it going? My name is such and such. Welcome to the academy. Like, we're so glad you're here today to do this with us. And, you know, it's a lot different than I think, you know, or at least when I assumed. I used to drop him off at the door of the academy and be like, we're good. So I remember being in those shoes and being like, I don't need to be around a bunch of guys picking each other up and throwing each other around. Like, I'm cool. You know, and it's so far from that. I mean, it is a lot of that, but yeah, it's more than that.
I agree. Some activities you will, or hobbies or whatever, I think that has been people's experience. They walk in and people are just too cool for school. Like there's kind of, you have to prove yourself before you're going to be admitted to the group. I think most of us in jiu-jitsu are such nerds about jiu-jitsu that the idea of somebody else starting their, like we're like, I want to be part of this. Like I really want to get into this. This is going to be so awesome. I'm so excited for you. That seems to be the vibe most of the time. So no, I definitely agree with that. Well, then I'm curious how you guys go about like the school running, because for people who don't know that are watching this, there's, at least in my experience, there's not a whole lot of training in how to run a school as you're coming up in the ranks of jiu-jitsu. A lot of it's the jiu-jitsu, right? But there's so much work on the back end of things, you know, and it's the making sure there's enough mat cleaner, making sure the mats are in good repair, making sure that the social media stuff and advertising and whatnot is all on point, making sure that your licensures and this and that are up to date, so all that. And then there's the curriculum or the jiu-jitsu and the interpersonal stuff with your students and making sure they're taken care of. So there's all this work that goes into it. How do you guys manage that or struggle with that? Or what are the good and bad there that you found?
I would say we're both fortunate in that, like I started helping with kids class at a blue belt and like helping manage the gym at that point too. When we left California and came up here, we ended up managing Bellevue and Seattle. So we both still had, she was still cutting hair back then, and I had a day job, and we would each individually, one of us would go to Seattle, one of us would go to Bellevue. We would do classes there and then meet at home. So we got the ins and outs of it before ever opening a school. We had a pretty firm grasp on what it was going to take, and then it's been learning, right?
The blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
For a lot
figuring it out. Right. Yeah.
You get a good basis teaching and kind of doing the management aspect of it, but you're right, there's a lot of things that like from that management aspect that I didn't learn, like social media and keeping up on the mat cleaner and like making sure that there was a lot of stuff, you know, just a lot of little pieces that you don't think about or see on a day-to-day basis unless you're doing them. But it's a learning curve, right? And just like jiu-jitsu and starting out on day one, it's just getting better and learning from your mistakes and trudging on and continuing to do the best that you can when you can.
Being comfortable, being uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Would there be any big pitfalls for somebody who is maybe, you know, they're thinking about starting a gym or that sort of thing? Anything that you'd throw out as sort of broad terms advice, like don't do this or definitely do that?
Wow. I wasn't ready for that one.
No, you take your time, and if there isn't anything,
is there a pitfall that I would?
I I mean, and maybe this comes from a multifaceted, like I really like a lot of different things. I'm a hairstylist, I really like gardening, I really like being creative, and a lot of times I've tried to monetize those passions because then I can sustain them sometimes a little bit better, and they're not just money going out, it can be money coming in and kind of balancing itself. But sometimes when you take something that you're very passionate about and you turn it into a monetizing business, right, it can take some of the luster out of it. And while I still very much love jiu-jitsu, it's different now, right? Like now I'm a teacher and I don't get to put my training ahead of that. So, and I know everybody's different. There's different academies. There's some academies where the head professors are adamantly going out and training and competing and all this kind of stuff. And it is possible. For me, that's not so much, right? I basically do a lot of the management, the behind the scenes, as well as teaching of our location in Snoqualmie. And putting my training on the back burner is something that I didn't anticipate as much, you know what I mean? And so that can be something that I battle with, you know, sometimes, because it's like I do want to be out there training more, but again, the students come first, the gym comes first. Totally. So that can be disheartening sometimes, but at the same time, I get the passion of building everybody else up and then finding the time to train when I can, kind of thing.
Sure.
Like I remember when I did have the opportunity to compete a lot because I was a student. Throughout owning the school, I've had a day job as well as taught. So it's not like I'm not at the school 8 hours a day. Just, you know, I work for Amazon, I work for Salesforce. Like I've 10-hour a day, 12-hour a day jobs. I miss being able to have my gym time just be focused on me, because it's not that anymore. It's focused on what I can be for the group of people that's there. Yeah. So I could definitely echo that change.
Yeah. But it's worth it. I mean, you have to have,
100%.
you have to want that, and you have to be okay with those caveats and like those exchanges that you're making, right? Yeah, perfect word, right? But it's not for everybody, I would say. But it's a wonderful experience, right? To know that you're, and not to be like silly about it, but you're changing lives, right? You're empowering people. Some people's break from reality.
Sure.
You're
For sure.
helping people with trauma. You're helping people be emboldened and feel confident with themselves. You're helping people learn self-defense. You're creating a community where people might otherwise not have much of one. There's a lot of good trade-offs, you know, that I think are worth it. But again, not everybody's cup of tea. So
looking at another topic, belts in jiu-jitsu, and if you wanted to do a summation of what you thought each belt should represent, that would be great. But I'm really interested primarily in what you think a black belt means or represents. And to frame this, I think for all of us in jiu-jitsu, there's kind of a recognition that the belt is commensurate with your skill level, right? So like a brown belt should be able to hang with brown belts, black belts with black belts, and every other delineation. And that has to hold true to some degree, but then when you add in things like, if somebody gets injured and they're out for 6 months and they come back to training, we don't take away their belt and say, well, you can't currently roll with purple belts, you're out of shape, so now we're going to demote you to blue belt. And similarly, if somebody's, works their way into their 60s or 70s as a black belt, we don't say, well, you couldn't hang with Gordon Ryan at this point, so we're not, you can't be a black belt anymore. We let, we not just let people, but people have earned that belt. That's where they're at. So it has to mean something beyond just your ability to roll. And so with that framing, what do you see a black belt as meaning or representing, or what should a black belt be? Or any of the other belts?
It's a great question. And I think it's an interesting one because each belt is very subjective. I think they're very individual, right? And each person giving it has a different idea of what that really looks like, yeah? I think for everyone, it has to do with, let me reframe. The black belt is an interesting one to try to quantify because it's going to mean something different for every individual and for every individual instructor. and there's multiple layers there. So, example, I've given 4 black belts, one being to Professor Lindsay, and I got multiple feedback on every single one that I gave. But one interesting one that I gave was a gentleman that moved to my school. He'd been training little over 12, 13 years. Had trained at Renzo School in New York for 3-4 years. He's a lawyer, so he's moved around, bounced around. He was at my school a little over a year. Definitely, his technique is amazing. You're a black belt. You can watch that, and I've watched the guy train with numerous black belts and with other people. So I understand his technical level and his ability to perform those things, which is an interesting measurement, because then you say, if he does take 12 months off and he's coming back and the purple belts are passing his guard, is he not still a black belt? Well, of course he is, right? And I think beyond that performance level is that commitment to what Jiu-Jitsu really is, not just for an individual, but for as the art in a whole, if that makes sense. Yeah, not just about arm-barring somebody, but understanding that it's empowering for a kid to not feel afraid of the bully and want to give that to them, not just teach a machismo, like, big tough guy way of, you understand, like, when you start to not just speak those things, but you are embodying what your instructor envisions a black belt to be, and you can technically show that, and then if you're, I think, a good instructor, you add some time on top of that in your head as like a buffer, right? Like an engineering background, my buildings fail safes, and I add some time on top of it, and then the belt promotion, and then we give them the belt. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's difficult. It's such a unique journey for everybody, right? Some people are starting at, like our kid, at a year old, and doing minute movements at such a young age, and kind of living through that through their life. We have, people who started at 25 and 35 and 45 and 60 and all this kind of stuff. And I think that recognizing everybody's own individual journey, where they're coming from and where they're hoping to go with it, and kind of, like one person's purple belt is going to be a different person's black belt or brown belt or blue belt or white belt. You know what I mean? It's so dysregulated through jiu-jitsu, right? Different than like karate or taekwondo, where there's like those different whatever. But I think it's hard to quantify, because I may really love spider guard. It may not be your cup of tea. You might really like deep half, and it might be not something that I play. And to judge us that we don't know certain techniques or certain aspects of it, to understand it as a whole, to understand how to make things move, how to use the movements, the understanding of the physics behind it, and all that kind of stuff, I think is important. But I think recognizing the individual that you're promoting and where they're coming from and what they're hoping to do with it, and, is a big part of it as well. Sure,
I definitely agree with, to that point, that's one of the cool and maddening things about jiu-jitsu is it's so vast, right? And it's frustrating, or I guess it just gives you humility. As a black belt, sometimes a white belt will be able to, what about this XYZ guard? Oh man, I barely know what that looks like, and so there's no way to know all
everything.
Of it. Yeah, and it's always evolving, it's always changing, which I think also makes it challenging as not just an advanced practitioner or black belt or that sort of thing, but also makes it challenging as an instructor.
Oh yeah.
So this is one thing I definitely wanted to ask you guys about. In terms of, you have a class, say it's 20 people, you're going to have everything from the very athletically abled people to people with no athletic background, people who are just starting out as white belts, people who are competitors at a national level that are brown belts. How do you structure a class successfully and teach all those people in a way that, it's not boring for the upper belts, but it's not overly challenging for the white belts?
I think it's a little bit of a dance that you have to do. I mean, sometimes I go in with a set curriculum and I teach that no matter what, but a lot of times I have more ideas of techniques that I want to do or positions that I want to play around with, and I'm really good on my toes, so to speak, so I really I'll come in with something, and depending on who shows up, if it's of those 20 people, do we have 18 high belts and 2 white belts? Do we have 18 white belts and 2 high belts? And I'll kind of maybe change a little bit, but I think you can always teach something fundamental and everybody gains something from it, because every time we teach, we add a detail, we add a little, piece that somebody can take from, and there's never, too many fundamental practices, you can't do the fundamentals too often. But I know for me personally, if I'm ever doing something more basic as we're kind of walking the room and helping people out, I'll try to go over to the higher belts and add a few little keynotes in. Oh man, I really think that you'd like this. And again, getting to that personal thing, if you really like wrist locks, hey, by the way, did you realize that there's a wrist lock here you should play around with? Do you really like, XYZ? Oh, by the way, you might like this. You're smaller, you may want to do this instead. And so really trying to tailor some of the moves for people as individuals, right? Whether it's because they need a little bit more advanced knowledge, whether they need to be pushed a little bit more, whether they need a little extra help in a movement for a certain reason. But I think kind of reading the room, and that might not be necessarily the correct answer, but I like to kind of wing it a little bit, have an idea of what I want to teach, and then kind of see who comes in and what comes in, and is this applicable for the situation?
Yeah, I think it's a great answer, and it's a great question. What I try to do is similar to Professor Lindsay, is like I'm treating every class individually. I have a high level idea of what I'm going to go in there and do, and then that will morph as I see 7 of 20 people in the class be intro classes, right? Another thing that I think is very important is that early in my jiu-jitsu, I remember instructors that would show like 5 or 6 things in an hour. I don't try that. Like, I try to go deep on 2 things, or 1 thing even, right? Yeah. And I really preach that to my students. Like, not just it's not like it's a theory. Look at Renzo Gracie, right? The guy did 1 thing over and over and over and over. He did it from different positions, don't get me wrong. He did the cross choke, but come on. He did it over and over. And this is when I first started jiu-jitsu. I lived in California. I worked for the IBJJF. I watched this happen. I heard people in the audience, the highest level guys I'd ever seen, talking about, he's going to cross choke, he's going to watch, he's going to cross choke, and every single time. So we know that the fundamentals work, and it's not like he just knew how to do that the first time. He had to do it over and over and look at the technique and make a mistake and do it over and over and over and over again. So I drill that into my students too. So a lot of what we do a lot of resistance techniques, which let's say if you go into a class, we walk in, 10 minutes of warm up, 20 minutes to 30 minutes of technique. Like I prefer, line up, everybody come over here, I'm going to show this movement, and then we're going to go try it. The rest of the time, we're trying resistance, right? Resistance training, whether it be a guard pass drill, king of the hill, king, queen of the hill, shark tank kind of resistance. Just different kind of resistance-based specific training that regardless of belt level, people get engaged, and then it goes back to the culture. Like, if you have a culture full of people that are trying to take care of each other, I know I can trust that my 300-pound student can end up in a rotation. I don't have to be paying attention with my 100-pound female student over there, and nothing is going to happen. They're not going to slip and fall because they're aware. In fact, I tell people, I expect that your partner's health is your responsibility. It is you take ownership. Every time we go like this, we shake hands, we bump knuckles, I own your safety. And if you have that as your North Star every time you train, I can train hard with you, bro. I know I can. And yes, mistakes happen. I'm not saying everybody's perfect. But if you keep that as your we're going to train hard, but I'm going to make sure no matter what, you're not going to get hurt. Like, that's why I take ownership over that. It changes the dynamics. So it allows for a lot of live training or more resistance-based training because I let the room, we can let the room flow. Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to steal that verbiage. That's awesome. I love that. So, very, very cool.
Thank you.
Well, then, competition. Do you guys, I think you both have competed. Mm-hmm. Do you actively compete now? Is that, I know your focus is the gym, but...
Last competition I did was terrible.
Shout out
Professor David Stegman. My cardio was terrible. His jiu-jitsu was amazing, and his cardio was great, and he beat me twice. And honestly, since owning the gym, I haven't had as much time to focus on my jiu-jitsu as much as teaching, and maybe I plan to get a little bit better at that. Honestly, jiu-jitsu or competition for me was always something that I did. I was never the most passionate about it. I was more excited about watching what jiu-jitsu did for the community, watching people grow. Like selfishly, when I see that female that like has that first thought in her head, like, hey man, I can choke that motherfucker, you understand? Like, I don't have to be afraid of that motherfucker ever again. Like, that is like, it brings me to tears nearly every time. Or that kid that's been bullied who feels afraid, and like they walk into our gym staring at the floor, and in a couple weeks, like their chest is like, that shit moves me more than having somebody raise my hand. Yeah, it's cool, man. I enjoy it. It's fun. But I enjoy it for a different reason. I enjoy it to try to like push myself and see where I am and what I can do, and I've done that many, many times. So. But yeah, we're big on competition too. We're a very well-rounded academy in that way. We have people like, I mean, man, what do we have? 10 people that competed at the last Rev, and 7 or 8 of them came home with medals and gold medals, and anyway, everybody does great. Everybody's always done great at Pan Am's, Worlds, everything. We have a good competitive culture as well. It's just not the only focus, right? Sure. We do kind of, I don't push adults as much as like I push, I try to push like my son, he's going to compete at least 2 of the 3 Revs every year. Yeah. I think adults can choose that. Like I don't push the kids, but I suggest it for the kids because I think it's such a huge gift to give a kid when you have the choices they're adults to try to like influence and guide their decision making. If I would have learned at 8, 9 years old how to stand up in front of 1,000 people and try to fight and like, you understand, fight my heart out, the performance anxiety, like the public speaking, like these things that they will grow with later, like I don't care if they ever have to fight in public, I care what those ancillary benefits that they'll get out of the competition, I think are cool. So I push for like the kids, man, go give it a try. I always push for the revolution. That's really the only one I endorse, and shout out Professor Jeff and Gina for all that they do, because I know as a school owner and also as a parent, I can endorse that tournament, and I know it's safe. I know that he makes sure every one of those refs takes ownership over the kid on their mat, and that makes me feel safe as an instructor to say, hey, parent, please. Take your kid down there and let them test themselves and push themselves. I'm suggesting it as their instructor, as the person you're paying to teach their kid jiu-jitsu, you understand? I'm suggesting it and endorsing it. I feel lucky to be able to do that, and that we have a tournament like that here in the Northwest. It's pretty dope.
And I'm definitely not an avid competitor by any means. I've competed enough, but I don't like everybody watching me. I like to be behind the scenes, and even coaching is a big stressor. Like, sure. It's a lot of emotion. It's a lot of all that kind of stuff. But I think competition is good, and I am amazed by those who do compete, and I think it's really amazing, especially women who have just had kids who are, mauling through competition and all that good stuff. But just not my cup of tea so much. I think it's great for me. I loved my experiences that I had, but I hate the spotlight being on me or feeling like it is. And even if nobody cares about me fighting, I still feel that. You know what I mean? I still feel like everyone's watching me. So I'm like,
she pulled guard at purple belt and blew a girl's knee out, and she was
from the sweep, but it was
she was devastated for weeks.
Yeah,
she was white as a sheet. After it happened, she was on the mat looking back at me at the Rev and just white as a sheet. You could see she felt just like just.
It was horrible.
Broken, anyway. It's not for everybody, but it is for some people, and we want to support their journey as well. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to be able to go out and test yourself and have that be have the good fortune to be able to do that, dude.
Sure.
Like, when I started, I didn't even think they had jiu-jitsu tournaments in the Northwest. Like, when we came back from California, I'd been there many, many years, the Rev was a thing. But before, I don't think there was when I started at Ivan's. I'd go to Ivan's and get punched in the face a lot, but that was...
Whole different ballgame, yeah. No, I share the same thing. I'm more of a fan personally of building martial artists and those sort of off the mat skills and benefits that jiu-jitsu brings. But I am also in awe of people who compete at a high level or a low level and do really well. Like that's not quite my journey with the thing. But for your students, in other words, so it sounds like it's not 100% necessity. It would be encouraged, particularly for the kids. Yeah. But you could advance in jiu-jitsu and not compete.
100%. 100%. I'll tell the story. Let me back up. And at GB Costa Mesa, we had a gentleman named Professor Gene. He started jiu-jitsu when he was 63. He was retired. And he took care of his wife, had dementia. If you ever asked him, like, Gene, what do? He would say he had the honor of staying home and taking care of the love of his life. Like, the guy was just amazing. Anyway, one year, his grandkids went out and bought him a year's worth of a membership at a place called Clever Jiu-Jitsu, because all the guy did was take care of his wife. He just stayed home and took care of his wife. Went grocery shopping, came home, took care of his wife. So the grandkids, knowing he was a cantankerous old man and wouldn't waste their money, you understand, they went and bought him a full year. So he said, he started going twice a year to Clever Jiu-Jitsu. If you've ever met Clever, I don't know how this guy lasted as long as he did there, but I love you, Clever. Anyway, he 2 hours a day, twice a week, and 15 years later, he got his black belt. And we were there. Anyway, amazing human being, amazing story, and really,
that's awesome.
How, as an instructor, would I measure that guy against like his tournament performance? You know what I'm saying? Like, if that was his only, path to black belt. And the funny thing is, I'll cry if I talk too much about Gene. His wife passed when he was 77. He got his black belt when he was 78 and died when he was 79. Yeah. It was like all those things that had to happen and he was done. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Anyway.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. Well, okay. So then, silly question to lighten the mood.
Yeah.
So, jiu-jitsu people, I think largely speaking, it's kind of a weird thing where a lot of jiu-jitsu people are not sports people. Like, they're almost anti-sports. Like, and I don't know if it's you guys where it's like, I'm not going to watch football. I just, jiu-jitsu is my thing. I don't watch. It seems to be like there's a common thread amongst a lot of jiu-jitsu people that way. But then I'm also, there's a sort of counter to that too, where a lot of jiu-jitsu people love training jiu-jitsu, but if you ask them to watch a jiu-jitsu event as a fan, like not looking at potential competitors, not looking at, to see what the new techniques are, just to watch it as a fan the way a football fan would watch a game, they're like, no, I don't really do that. Do you guys watch jiu-jitsu? Do you watch it as a fan and like...
A fair amount, but again, it depends on what the nature of the event is or whatnot, but I think it's interesting. But again, there's always like the events that don't look like much is happening, or the match that doesn't, much is not happening because it's either so technical or just kind of a lot of stalling. But yeah, I like watching it. Not all the time, I have to be in the mood for it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've seen anyone in my life as fanatic about a sport as I've seen some like football fanatics. But that being said, I like to sit down. Like I went to ADCC 2022 and I was like literally as close to that camera as them fighting. And it was one of the coolest experiences of my whole life, like that live event and being there, seeing our sport like happening at that level with those martial artists and like everything that was going on, and Renzo and Nate Diaz and like Joe Rogan. Like it was just a crazy experience. So yes, I absolutely watch it, but I don't think if it was like a Monday Night Football thing, it would have to be it would have to be pretty high level for me to tune in every Friday. Like you think about those crazy people about football, like that's all they watch, so
it's hard to imagine playing fantasy jiu-jitsu leagues. I don't know.
I don't even know how fantasy football. I've never even ventured to try to understand it. So, but yeah, I don't know.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to the technique you're going to show, and appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for including us.